Clara Jennings had never wanted to return to Bath. Not since the day her ex-husband, Edward Langford, left her with their 2-year-old son and a mortgage she could barely afford. But the envelope that came through her letterbox that rainy Tuesday morning changed everything. Silver-trimmed, heavy paper, and the unmistakable scent of expensive perfume. It was a formal invitation to Edward's sister's wedding. It was addressed not just to Clara, but to her and her son, Jamie. She stared at it for a long time. Memories crashed in waves, laughter echoing through Edward's family home in Lansdowne Crescent, the coldness that crept in when his family realized she didn't come from money, and the final silence after the divorce papers were signed. Still, Clara believed Jamie had a right to know where he came from. She packed their best clothes, boarded the train from Bristol to Bath, and tried to ignore the knots in her stomach. The reception was held at a luxury manor on the outskirts of the city. Rosewood Hall. It was the sort of place Clara had once dreamed of, before life taught her not to. As she stepped through the grand entrance with Jamie's small hand in hers, eyes turned. Not curious, not warm, assessing, judging. Edward's new fiancée, Charlotte, was the first to greet them. Tall, blonde, polished to perfection, she offered Clara a smile so sharp it could cut glass. "Oh, you came. How brave of you, Clara," Charlotte said, sipping champagne. "And little Jamie, how sweet. He does look like his father, doesn't he?" Clara smiled politely, her cheeks burning. The whispers started as soon as they passed. "Single mother. Still alone, is she?" Edward certainly traded up. Clara caught fragments as they moved through the marble-floored hall. She held Jamie's hand tighter. Dinner was worse. They were seated at the far end, by the kitchen doors. None of Edward's family spoke to her beyond pleasantries. They gushed over Charlotte, praised her charity work, her family's vineyard in Kent. Clara ate quietly, Jamie doodling on a napkin beside her. But then came the moment. A soft voice by her elbow. "Miss Jennings," the waiter said, "I've reserved a little quiet space in the back for you and Jamie. Somewhere more comfortable." Clara turned. The waiter was young, in his early 20s, but his eyes held something familiar. Recognition. Gratitude. She hesitated. "Have we met?" He smiled. "You helped my mum. Years ago. You might not remember. But I do." And with that, he led her away, just as a curious silence fell over the nearby table. Thomas led Clara and Jamie through a narrow corridor behind the main hall, past gleaming copper pots and the bustle of kitchen staff. The noise and chatter faded until they reached a small private room, softly lit and warm. Jamie's eyes brightened as he settled onto a velvet armchair. Clara exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "I'm sorry about how they treated you," Thomas said quietly, folding his arms. "They don't know the whole story." Clara looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" Thomas took a deep breath. "Years ago, your kindness helped my family more than you realize. When my mum was ill, you organized meals, found doctors, and never asked for anything in return. You did it all while caring for Jamie. Even then." Clara's throat tightened. She had always tried to keep her struggles private, afraid of pity or judgment. "I never wanted anyone to know," she said softly. "Maybe not," Thomas nodded, "but your strength has inspired more people than you think. Including me." Outside, the wedding festivities continued, but inside that small room, Clara felt a quiet solidarity she hadn't known she needed. Suddenly, a sharp knock came at the door. Thomas glanced through the window and paled. Edward was standing there, flanked by Charlotte, his expression unreadable. "Thomas," Edward said coldly, "who is this woman?" Clara's heart pounded. The moment she had dreaded was here. Edward's gaze was sharp, but Clara refused to show any fear. She straightened her back and looked him in the eye. "I am Clara Jennings," she said calmly. "And this is my son, Jamie." Charlotte stepped forward, her smile tight. "I don't see why you're here. This is a family celebration." Clara's voice didn't waver. "Jamie is family. Whether you like it or not." Edward's jaw tightened. "You've made your choices, Clara. Now live with them." Before Clara could respond, Thomas intervened. "Edward, she helped my family when no one else would. She is nothing like what you say." The room fell silent. Edward looked at Thomas, then back at Clara, his expression conflicted. I didn't know," he muttered. Clara's heart ached, but she stood firm. "Maybe now you understand." As Edward turned and walked away, the door behind him opened, and the sound of wedding bells echoed faintly in the distance. After Edward's abrupt departure, Clara sank into a chair, Jamie quietly clutching her hand. The air still felt heavy with unspoken words, but a strange calm settled over her. Thomas remained by her side, a silent guardian against the lingering coldness. The wedding guests, who had been watching from a distance, began to murmur among themselves. Some faces softened, others averted their eyes, and a few approached cautiously. Margaret, Edward's elderly aunt, was the first to step forward. Her eyes, sharp yet kind, met Clara's. "Child," she said gently, "we have been harsh. Perhaps we never saw the full picture." Clara nodded slowly, grateful yet wary. Charlotte, still composed but visibly shaken, whispered to her husband, "We underestimated her." Dinner resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations grew warmer, and Jamie found himself drawing smiles from children who had ignored him before. Later, as the night deepened, Thomas returned with a small envelope. He handed it to Clara quietly. "Your mother left this for you," he said softly. Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter in her mother's delicate handwriting, filled with words of encouragement, love, and a secret about Clara's own strength that had been passed down through generations. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. In that moment, surrounded by strangers who were beginning to see her differently, she realized her journey was far from over, but she was no longer alone. The morning after the wedding dawned gray and soft. Clara sat by the window in a small room at Rosewood Hall, the letter from her mother resting in her lap. Jamie played quietly nearby, his innocent laughter a gentle reminder of what truly mattered. Thomas knocked and entered, carrying 2 cups of tea. "I wanted to say thank you," Clara began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "For everything you did last night. For standing up for me." Thomas smiled warmly. "You deserved it. No one should be judged for the life they live." Clara looked out at the gardens, dew sparkling on the leaves. "For so long I felt like I had to prove myself, to Edward, to his family, to the world. But maybe the only person I need to prove anything to is Jamie." Thomas nodded in agreement. "He's lucky to have you." As the sun peeked through the clouds, Clara felt a quiet hope stir within her. This visit, born from pain and ridicule, had planted the seeds of something new: acceptance, strength, and the possibility of peace. She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Jamie's forehead. Whatever the future held, Clara knew one thing. She would face it on her own terms, with her son by her side. The days following the wedding brought a delicate peace to Rosewood Hall. The guests had departed, the halls once filled with chatter and music now settled into quiet contemplation. Clara and Jamie stayed on a little longer, encouraged by Thomas's gentle invitations and the unexpected warmth from Margaret and a few others who had softened toward them. Clara spent her mornings walking through the garden paths, Jamie chasing after butterflies and collecting wildflowers. The air was crisp and fragrant, a gentle reminder that even after storms, new life could emerge. She found herself reflecting on the letter from her mother, reading it again and again. The words had awakened something within her, a legacy of strength and hope passed down through generations of women in her family. That legacy was not one of perfection, but of perseverance. In the afternoons, Thomas invited Clara to the library, a grand room lined with books from floor to ceiling. He shared stories about the family's history, and slowly, walls began to crumble. Clara learned about Edward's childhood pressures, his mother's rigid expectations, and how misunderstandings had grown into bitterness over the years. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of violet and gold, Clara and Thomas sat by the fire in the great hall. Jamie was asleep in the next room, exhausted from a day of play. "I've always believed people can change," Clara said quietly, stirring her tea. Thomas nodded, his eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "Sometimes it takes someone brave enough to show them a different way." Just then the door creaked open, and Edward appeared, hesitating. The tension in the room was palpable, but Clara met his gaze without fear. "I wanted to apologize," Edward said, his voice low but sincere. "I was wrong to judge you so harshly. I see now that I was blinded by pride and fear." Clara felt a strange mixture of relief and caution. Forgiveness was not easy, but this was a start. They spoke late into the night, peeling back layers of resentment and regret, finding common ground in their shared history and hopes for Jamie's future. As the moonlight streamed through the tall windows, Clara realized that sometimes the hardest battles were the ones fought within, and that healing often began with a single act of courage. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of a new dawn. The days that followed Edward's apology were filled with cautious but genuine attempts at reconciliation. Clara was learning to navigate this fragile new dynamic, all while trying to protect Jamie from the emotional turbulence swirling around them. One afternoon, Clara and Jamie returned to the village cafe where they had first met Thomas. The cozy space smelled of fresh bread and brewing coffee, its wooden tables worn smooth by years of conversation. As they sat down, the familiar waiter approached with a knowing smile. "Good to see you again, Miss Jennings," he said warmly. "And this must be young Jamie." Clara nodded, offering a polite smile. Jamie grinned shyly. The waiter leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "You know, I've seen a lot of families come and go here, but yours, well, it's special." Curiosity piqued, Clara asked, "What do you mean?" The waiter glanced around the room before continuing. "When people judge too quickly, they miss what really matters. I overheard the conversation at the wedding. Some unkind things said about you. But I also saw the strength you carry, the love you give Jamie." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you. That means more than you know." He smiled gently. "People will talk, but your story, it's one of courage. I hope they come to see that." Later that day, word began to spread through the village. Conversations shifted, whispers turning to admiration. Clara noticed strangers offering smiles where there had been cold stares. Jamie's laughter grew freer as new friendships blossomed. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Clara stood at the edge of the garden, reflecting on how a simple act of kindness from a stranger had begun to unravel years of judgment and silence. Sometimes the truth did not need a grand stage, just a willing heart to share it. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains of Rosewood Hall as Clara woke feeling a calm she hadn't known in years. The village seemed transformed, not just in its quiet streets and blooming gardens, but in the way it embraced her and Jamie with open arms. Edward had become a different man, one willing to put past grievances aside and build a future not just for himself, but for his son and Clara. Margaret's cold demeanor had thawed into warmth, and even the whispers of gossip had softened into respectful conversations. Clara and Thomas stood in the grand hallway, preparing for the day's events. A small gathering to celebrate Jamie's upcoming birthday and the new bonds formed between the families. Jamie laughed as he played with a group of children in the garden, his bright eyes full of hope. Thomas turned to Clara and smiled. "You've changed this place as much as it's changed you." Clara nodded. "It's more than I ever imagined. Acceptance, forgiveness, and the chance to start again." As the afternoon sun cast golden light across Rosewood Hall, Clara realized that her journey was far from over. But she no longer felt alone or judged. With Jamie's hand in hers, she stepped forward into a new chapter, one defined by love, resilience, and the quiet power of family.